Councilmember Deb Garrett. And we also have myself, TJ Kennedy, the chairperson, and we have members of the planning department, Commissioner Streichman, and the economic development coordinator, Dylan Kirk. And we'll roll into the presentation that the planning department is going to give, an update on the 1 Mile Square redevelopment project.
All right, thank you. So while I did my presentation a few weeks ago at the planning committee, we talked about the planning stages of different efforts around the city. We really did not hit on Monument Square, so I wanted to give you an update on that tonight. I do want to say, though, one of note is that the burned out building at the corner of 114th and 3rd Avenue was demolished today. The first step in a project to convert the St. Augustine School into 31 units. And the IDA took action on that last week, 2 weeks ago, making that project, kicking it off, basically. I thought it would be a good time to bring us up to speed on Monument Square. It's been over 3 months since the review committee selected Hoboken Brownstone as the preferred developer, and it's been a little over 2 months since we had the meet and greet at the well-attended Arts Center. During that time, because this was a different process, we've been working with Hoboken to move the project forward, and Hoboken has been actively meeting with business owners, residents, downtown residents and prospective tenants trying to move the project forward. So we are starting to make some progress. I have some extremely good news to relay is that last week we had 3 grants associated with this and they were all expired. Last week, the Department of State extended the $3 million grant on Monument Square. So that is it's actually a $1.5 million grant matched by money that the city has earmarked specifically for this project. So that really helps us to start taking some more proactive steps to get the proposal moving forward. I'm going to hand the discussion right now on Monument Square just off to Dylan Turk, who can give you a little bit update more about where we are. Dylan has been with us a year now. He's our Director of Economic Development, and I figured I'd start getting him in front of you a little bit more. So, Dylan, you want to...
How's everybody doing tonight? Let me just get this down here. So, yes, thanks for listening to us talk about 1 Monument Square, I guess. So in any case, as Steve mentioned, we've been really busy with Hoboken Brownstone Company. We're really excited about the Department of State grant extension. That's a huge piece because what it allows us to do essentially is move forward with some of the initial infrastructure, utility work that needs to get done. So there's a huge piece of this puzzle, which is what is the actual investment that's going to be made in terms of public space, right? Because we come out of the public charrette knowing there's some basic components here that we have to provide for this really to be a successful project. The developer partner is in agreement with us that it's a great project. The idea of having a public plaza there, the idea of having that connection out to the riverfront, public parking, all these things are sort of agreed by everybody that they should be there. The problem is going to be the actual economics of the deal, which everybody understands is, how much of this is going to be public, how much of this is going to be private, how do we reconcile all of that? And to do that, we need to do a whole lot of due diligence that we're in the process of doing right now. So with this money, we can actually really get into the ground, do some of the things that we need to do for the structural analysis, some of the engineering work, some of the site conditions work, some of the work related to the utilities. Again, I brought that up. That's going to have a larger effect on everybody that's actually along Front Street in that area. They're currently faced also with some infrastructure issues, and this actually opens things up for those developers as well. So to get their buildings back online, so this money can really get put to use right away to do some really fantastic things for Lower River Street specifically. And I can get more into that. I'll go over some other projects as well after a little bit later. So that's the first sort of thing that's really important to us. Steve and I have been talking to others about the RFQ versus the RFP process, and we're realizing that there might be a little bit of it's a bit sort of jargony for a lot of people. What's the difference between an RFQ and an RFP? So I just thought I'd sort of take this opportunity to kind of go over why we went through this process and what that sort of sets us up for the future. So as we come before you again in the next couple of months, that you'll already be familiar with the process and what's kind of coming down the pike. So, and And if I'm a little sort of blunt or direct about anything, I'm not going to apologize, but I think it's kind of important just to sort of admit to what we've done so far. So if you look sort of at the history of One Monument Square, there was obviously a couple of different issues. It became pretty clear, I think, with the first couple of attempts that initially there's this idea that we should put out an RFP. A developer is going to answer to it with a project that everyone's going to love, and it's going to be feasible to build, and that project will move forward with an LDA. We'll pull the money together somehow, and they'll make it all work, right? That's not always the case. And so what we've learned over the last 4 attempts is that going through it, expecting a developer to basically take a shot in the dark with a dart, trying to hit exactly what that project's going to be that's going to work for everyone and still make sense financially for them to build is a little bit unfair in a lot of ways. What's best is a process that sort of allows us to work with the developer and select somebody based on their merits of prior experiences, for instance, to work with them based on their portfolio, financial capacity, and also their vision in themselves of what they see as a good project for them to be invested in. And that's really what we did with this RFQ process. A lot of other municipalities do this as well. But the real beauty of it is it allows us to say, this is the developer we want to work with. And from that point, really move towards, this is a project we can do together as a partnership. So that being said, when we issued the RFQ, we had 4 really qualified responses, and it was pretty clear by the selection committee that they selected Hoboken Brownstone Company because they had a lot of the relevant and also relevant experience and also the capacity to pull a project like this off without too many hiccups, for sure. So as everyone knows, the 3 main components that came out of that visioning process, we didn't want to start with the developer. We wanted to start with the public. The public got together over 3-4 days and really put together a strong vision for what they want to see on One Monument Square. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that no matter, what you think of the actual aesthetics of the buildings that they designed or whatever it is, but the main components of that, the public space, the walkway down to the riverfront, that connecting piece that gives people access to an improved riverfront park, and the public parking components are all things that are necessary, and they're going to really lift and sort of revitalize our downtown in a way that we haven't really experienced yet, that we're talking about like reaching that next level as opposed to where we are now. So if we were to just sell this property off right now and say it doesn't make any financial sense for someone to build this thing, there'd be no way for us to sort of really control this process or to stay involved in it. So by doing this through a partnership and an RFQ, we have the ability to really be partners on that public space to either continue to own it, continue to operate it. There's different ways that we can take a look at this, and that's sort of what we're exploring now. But it's a true P3 partnership, which is being used all over the place. But there's also some inherent difficulties that come along with that as well. One of them being the process of disposition. As I'm sure you guys are well more aware than I am with Chapter 83 in the City Code, it doesn't leave a lot of different ways to dispose of a property. Inevitably, if we're asking for a sale price, this is never going to happen. I think we all have to come to that sort of understanding that we're not getting money back for this property. This is a very expensive thing to build. The likelihood of getting exactly what the public envisioned as well in that process, the developers already said this as much. We can't. There's not enough income in that project to make it work based on the amount that it would actually cost to build it. But the question now becomes, how do we start spending that money to actually drill down on those numbers so we can actually find that delta between the two and come up with the money that through some of the grants we already have and through some different ways to basically work with the developer on financing things. There's a number of different options. I'm not going to get into the details of which because they're part of our ongoing conversations, but there's some very different ways we can do this based on the fact that we're not just taking them one time through an RFP process, give us your best and final offer essentially, and then trying to make a deal based on that. We have this ability to now negotiate with them, which is what we're doing. So while it might take a little bit more time, that also means that we have the flexibility to do it right. And so that's why, there might be a month or 2 here and there while we're trying to get some of these initial due diligence things done. So that's what we're up to right now. We're going to be coming back to you very soon with an option, most likely. Sorry, did you want to ask a question?
Chair.
Councilmember Gully.
Dylan, when you talk to the contractor that won the bid, and I hear the conversation that it might not be able to sustain it in the way it was developed through the people's thoughts and the
Sure.
that we had, have they given you any idea of what kind of variances we're going to face or how limited they are to get to that point of what people had said, hey, this is what we want in this spot?
Variances or variations, you mean? Or
Variation, have they given you any variations?
Sure.
Have they given you any limitations as to what they can build there and what they can't do?
So as of right now, and this is something I'm getting to, but as of right now, they haven't yet gotten to the point where they can really get into design because they don't have any assurances at the moment. I mean, there's word of mouth and handshake saying, hey, you guys are the guys we've given you, you know, you're our guys to do this. But at the same time, they don't have an option in hand right now that says if they deliver these couple of things that we need, right, they're going to get the property. So the first steps are sort of negotiating out that first step to give them site control because they need assurances before they go off and spend $200,000, whatever it's going to be to design this thing. That, hey, look, you know, we're working together. We're your people to do this, and then we'll be working with their design team on the public portions as well. So I can tell you for sure. For instance, just off the top, we did some exercises, as you know, between when the SHREC came out and when we started soliciting for the RFQ. I start cost estimating some of these different components of what the public SHREC came out with, and without getting into too many details, I can tell you that it's not about specific design aesthetics. It's about the difficulty inherent in trying to build waterfront, trying to build 2 levels of parking that can support multiple different uses, and then determining what's not. There's a lot of limits that are still there with inherent whatever market rents are, right? You can't sort of inflate them just because it's on the waterfront. Right. It's any, like any business. It's your income minus your cost to build and then operating expenses. And then if we're saying to them also, hey, by the way, you can't use 50% or 30% of your land because it's going to be public space. Well, that's even more difficult, right? So it's definitely a balance, and that's why this kind of deal is impossible through the RFP process. You just can't do it. Like, how are they going to come up with a number that's going to work? They might overpromise, right? That's what we've seen. Somebody might come in and overpromise something, and then not be able to deliver it, or people are just going to say, hey, you know what? I'm not even going to take a chance on this thing. Why put myself through that kind of process?
And I'm going to just add in for a minute that we always said during the charrette process that was a vision. Okay, don't pick your curtains and your lawn furniture yet. You know, this is not necessarily what is going to get built. But the developer, the Hoboken Brownstone, did see what the vision was, and they are fully committed, you know, to the public space and the connections and those elements of it.
Right.
They might morph a little bit from what was there, and that's what we're working on.
And it's also about the uses, right? I mean, there was a number of different things thrown out there about, you know, office space versus a restaurant versus, and if you look at market rents for all those things and you look at how they work, there's going to be a balance that we're going to reach, but it's going to take time. But the nice thing is this is an ongoing conversation, and we're working on the same side, as opposed to some sort of oppositional, you can't do this, you can't do this. It's what can we do together?
You keep the council up to date on what they might present or what they'll.
That's why we're here. We're here because we really want to be working with all of you.
And you're going to be the point person on this project?
Yeah, I mean, as long as I don't say anything that's going to get me in trouble, yeah, absolutely. I'm here to work with you guys. So I want to help, and I also want you to understand that that this is going to be. We're going to be coming back to you saying, hey, look, all of us in together, like we need to pull forward on this thing because this is our shot. This is our good shot to do this thing. So I mean, I don't want to drone on too much about some of this stuff here, but now that we have the DOS extension, Steve's already talked about how much that is. We'll continue to negotiate on the option, what those core components are. There's going to be some different, a couple ways to do this in terms of actually getting the LDA complete, and that's going to be based on what we figure out from now until through some of the site work that's going to get done, through some of the utility planning, through some of the actual design process. But the idea here is for Hoboken Brownstone Company to feel confident that we're spending money and doing our part, and then they're going to spend money as well to do their part in terms of designing it, because otherwise everyone's got to have skin in the game. So that's pretty much it. But the LDA, we're going to have to wait on what are the costs of the public portions for the project, right? Because, you know, yes, we want public portions, but nothing's free. So we're going to have to figure out what this is all going to cost. The quantity, source, and timing of available public funding. Again, there's a lot of different opportunities out there that we've never even explored before. The question is going to be, you know, is it available, and how quickly can we get to it? Is the timing going to line up with everything? So that's really important, and that's going to be next over the next couple of months. We're going to be working with our engineers and HBC's, Hoboken Brownstone Company, their design team to plan infrastructure improvements. We'll get the assignable option done. We'll work on the LDA. And then there's going to be a rapidly escalating sort of design phase, in which case we'll be going in front of the public quite often to say, hey, look, this is what we're working on. How are we doing with this? Is this looking good? We're still going to have to go through planning, zoning, you know, all the other historic review committee, like any other project, but we don't want to get there and surprise anybody with anything it wants to be. We know all along what we're getting into. It's very transparent. It's very open. This is what we're trying to do.
And I'll add in, we have now weekly calls with the developer. I mean, they were selected because of their experience in difficult waterfront development. That was one of the things the committee was especially impressed with. And so we are having our weekly meetings, moving the discussions forward and getting to a project. And so this Department of State funding is really going to help.
Right. Absolutely.
Dylan,
Sure.
is there plans or opportunities for thermal energy,
Absolutely. So
geothermal? Sorry.
So without jumping too far down, something I could go on about for hours, we put in a CFA grant. Yeah, we put in a CFA grant for a district-wide heating and cooling system, a geothermal system, which is something sort of state-of-the-art in the city or the state of New York. As everyone knows, there's a new law that we have to reduce our emissions and our carbon, our CO2 in the coming out of the state of New York by, I think, 2045. I don't have it in front of me, but we don't really know exactly how we're going to do that yet as a state. And so what we've done is reached out to NYSERDA very quickly and said, hey, look, we want to be one of the first cities that can figure this out. Is there funding available if we're going to start working on these district-wide systems? Because it's not going to make sense for them to go door to door telling people to put heat pumps in their houses. They're going to have to actually install district-wide systems that provide completely net zero heating and cooling using just ambient temperature from the ground or from water sources, something like that. So if we can prove that we know how to do it here in the city, there'll be companies coming here trying to work off that technology. We can actually grow jobs that way. We can do more than just grow jobs. We can actually start working with RPI, who's another partner on a different grant that we're applying for smart cities technology as well. So while all of this is not just keyed in on having, helping development or helping the environment, it's also about jobs as well. Because for me, that's where economic development starts and ends. It's got to be about jobs. So I think we have an opportunity to really be on the forefront of an emerging industry that is actually mandated by law now. So there's nowhere like that is the future. And if we're in front of it, there's a lot we can do with that. This could be made in Troy again.
Any other questions, Councilmember Gully?
One more quick question, the park area.
Sure.
I know we do public space down to is that park going to be revised, and is there an opportunity for any park and rec grants that might be out there to extend that area in the vision of what the people had?
Sure. So phase 2 is what you're referring to, right? Phase 2 of the of Riverfront Park. So one of the things we love so much about Hoboken Brownstone Company is that to them it's a huge asset to be on a park. It's a huge asset to have public space there as well. And so we're already talking with them about how they can help inform the design process, also help with some of the technical assistance with certain things. They're already talking with the bid as well about things like the playground that might go there at some point that we're working with on so it's another project we're working on. And part of what we just have this implementation grant is being actually shifted over to focus on that part of the park where you currently have a parking lot, right? And so we're going to be working with Hoboken Brownstone Company to basically plan to do this concurrently or as soon as we're able to, so that we don't rip it up with construction equipment eventually. But as soon as we're able to, we'll have a plan ready to go. And hopefully there's not going to be any sort of, because we already have the plans, we already know what we're doing more or less, it's not going to be a whole rewrite essentially.
I was just thinking if you're going to tie into water or any
Right.
type of drain or sewage drain, that you might, set that up as you're building that area, if you're working off of that point.
Right. So.
Like you said, always going to be a little ahead and a little behind.
Right. So we're going to consider all the future plans, and that's definitely something we're going to stay on top of. But part of it is also moving further, I guess, south of there towards Front Street, towards State Street, because there's a whole bunch of utility issues that we have to deal with over there as well. Yeah. So we'll be trying to clean all that up for everybody so we can see more development.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, final thoughts, final comments? Council President?
I'll get a wrap up after.
Sure.
Not to belabor this, and thank you, Bill, which is kind of you're on top of it.
Thanks.
Hopefully, the timeline is a good timeline.
We're being pragmatic.
Good.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, and before we close, anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
All right, meeting closed. Anash Cummings made the motion, Jim Gully made the second. All in favor, aye.
I'm glad they have a better person to do it.